The autumn of 1946 brought a peculiar golden quality to Chicago's afternoons, as if the city itself was basking in the afterglow of victory. Our man, let's not burden him with a name, for he could be any of 1,000 craftsmen who kept the city glowing, bent over his workbench in a basement workshop on South State Street, threading electrodes through glass tubing with the patience of a watchmaker. The smell of heated glass and inert gases had become as familiar to him as his own breath over the 14 years since he'd first learned the trade. His mentor, old Herman Kruger, dead now 3 winters, would have approved of the steady hand guiding the torch. "The glass must flow like honey," Herman used to say in his thick Bavarian accent, "not break like ice." Above his head, the city rumbled with streetcars and automobiles, their vibrations sending tiny ripples through the mercury in the switching units he was preparing. Each tremor reminded him that Chicago never slept, never stopped demanding more light, more spectacle, more promise, spelled out in glowing tubes of bent glass and noble gases. Rosa looked up from her own bench, where she was bending tubes for a bakery sign. "The letter S is fighting me today," she said, her Polish accent softening the frustration. She'd been with him 2 years now, ever since her husband didn't come back from the Pacific, and she'd proved to have surprising talent for the delicate work. "Let the glass tell you where it wants to go," he replied, not looking up from his own work. It was something Herman would have said, though the old man would have added a lengthy discourse on the molecular structure of heated silicate. The workshop occupied what had once been a speakeasy's storage room, and sometimes he still found old bottles tucked behind the brick walls. The space wasn't much. 2 workbenches, a gas manifold system he'd built himself, racks of clear and colored tubing, tanks of neon and argon, and the vacuum pump that wheezed like an asthmatic whenever the humidity rose above 60%. But it was his kingdom, down here below the street level, where he transformed sand and fire and invisible gases into words that burned against the night. The bell above the door chimed. He'd installed it last month, tired of being startled by sudden visitors. Sam Goldstein descended the wooden stairs, his cane tapping a familiar rhythm. "You ready to lose at chess again?" Sam asked, setting a paper bag on the cleared corner of the workbench they used for their weekly games. "I won last week," the craftsman reminded him, already reaching for the board kept on a shelf between boxes of electrodes. "You won because I was distracted by that singer business." Sam unwrapped 2 pastrami sandwiches from Rosen's Delicatessen, the smell immediately overwhelming the workshop's chemical tang. "You hear anything more about that girl? Lila something?" He shook his head, setting up the chess pieces with practiced efficiency. Lila Morgenstern had been the talk of the neighborhood for a month now, a jazz singer at one of the South Loop clubs who'd vanished after her last set on September 15th. Vinnie Torelli mentioned her when he commissioned his new sign. Said she used to sing at his place before moving to the Sapphire Room. "Beautiful girl," Sam said, moving his pawn to E4. "Voice like an angel, they say, though I never heard her myself. My Rachel, may she rest in peace, she would have loved that modern jazz." He paused, studying the board. "Strange how people can just disappear in a city this size." "You'd think someone would have seen something." Rosa had stopped working, listening to their conversation. "In Warsaw," she said quietly, "people disappeared all the time during the war. Sometimes they came back. Usually they didn't." She returned to her glass bending with renewed focus, as if the memory required immediate suppression through work. The craftsman moved his knight, considering Rosa's words. She rarely spoke of Poland, of what she'd seen before making it to America in '43. He knew she had a brother still there, somewhere in the Soviet sector. But the details remained locked behind her careful English and cautious smile. "Different kind of disappearing here," Sam said, but his voice carried less certainty than usual. "This is Chicago. We have laws, we have police. We have Detective O'Malley," the craftsman added with a slight smile, "who couldn't find water if he fell in the lake." Sam chuckled, but the sound felt hollow in the basement workshop. Outside, a truck rumbled past, shaking dust from the ceiling beams. The craftsman noticed Rosa had successfully completed her S, a perfect curve of glass that would soon glow red against some bakery window, promising fresh bread and sweet rolls to morning commuters. The chess game proceeded in comfortable silence, punctuated only by the hiss of the torch when Rosa moved to her next letter. This was the rhythm of his life. Glass and gas, chess and conversation. The steady transformation of raw materials into something that pushed back the darkness. He'd built a reputation on reliability, on signs that didn't flicker or fail, on understanding not just the technical specifications, but the dreams his clients wanted to spell out in light. "Check," Sam announced, his rook sliding into position with satisfaction. The craftsman studied the board, finding his king trapped exactly where Sam had been maneuvering him for the last 6 moves. His mind worked the same way with neon, seeing the finished product while still holding raw glass, understanding how each bend and connection would contribute to the final display. But Sam had always been better at chess, even when his eyes weren't what they used to be. "You know," Sam said, pocketing his winnings, they played for quarters, enough to make it interesting without causing hardship, "Torelli's new sign should be something to see. The Blue Dahlia. Fancy name for a jazz club." "Installations next week," the craftsman confirmed, already mentally reviewing the complex wiring diagram. The sign would be his largest to date, with sequential lighting that would make the Dahlia appear to bloom against the night sky. Vinny had paid extra for the effect, wanting something that would draw customers away from the competing clubs spreading through the South Loop. Rosa finished for the day, washing her hands in the industrial sink he'd installed last year. "My papers expire next month," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "Immigration says they need proof of employment, proof of residence, proof of everything." He nodded, understanding. "We'll write a letter, official letterhead. Sam knows a notary who doesn't ask too many questions." Questions, Sam mused, packing up the chess set, seem to be in short supply these days. Everyone's so eager to forget the war, to move forward, that we don't ask why a young singer disappears, or why the city needs so many lights burning all night long. The craftsman considered this as he cleaned his own workspace, securing the torch and checking the gas valves twice, Herman's first rule of workshop safety. Perhaps Sam was right. Perhaps they were all so busy building tomorrow that they'd forgotten to question today. But then again, his job wasn't to question. His job was to bend glass, fill it with gas, and make it glow. The questions, like the darkness his signs pushed back, would always be there waiting. October 20th arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind that made the city's concrete sweat and brought everyone out onto their stoops hoping for a breeze. The craftsman had just finished testing the last section of the Blue Dahlia sign when footsteps thundered down his workshop stairs, not the measured descent of a customer, but the frantic stumbling of panic. Vincent Torelli burst through the door without knocking, his usually immaculate suit disheveled, his face flushed beneath his fedora. "You gotta help me," he said, the words tumbling out between gasps. "The sign. Something's wrong with the sign." The craftsman set down his voltage meter carefully, his mind already running through possible failures. He'd installed the sign just 5 days ago, tested every connection, every tube. Flickering? Dead section? Worse. Vinny collapsed into the chair usually reserved for customers, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. Last night, around 2:30, the whole crowd outside sees it change. The letters, they spell something different, just for maybe 10-12 seconds, then back to normal. Rosa looked up from her inventory ledger, her expression skeptical. The craftsman shared her doubt. Neon signs didn't simply rearrange themselves. What did it spell? Vinny's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Lila is dead. The workshop fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation fan. Even Rosa, who hadn't known the missing singer, understood the weight of those 3 words appearing in fire against the night sky. The craftsman's first thought was technical. How could such a transformation even be possible? His second was practical. His reputation hung on every sign he created. How many people saw this? Maybe 40, 50? Words spreading like wildfire. Some are saying it's a sign from God. Others think Lila's ghost is trying to tell us something. Vinny stubbed out his cigarette with violent jabs. Either way, it's killing my business. Who wants to drink where the dead are sending messages? The craftsman pulled out his installation diagrams, spreading them across the workbench. The blue Dahlia sign consisted of 212 feet of tubing, forming elegant script with a stylized flower that bloomed through sequential circuits. He'd wired it himself, using a timer system of his own design. There was simply no way for the letters to rearrange without physical intervention. "I'll need to inspect it tonight," he said, already making mental notes of what equipment to bring. After closing. "Tonight? What about now?" Vinny's desperation edged toward anger. "I'm paying you good money, and you'll get good service, but I need to see it happen if it happens again." "Need to check the electrical patterns when the club's running, when everything's drawing power." Vinny left, slightly mollified but still agitated, trailing cigarette smoke and mumbled Italian curses. Rosa waited until his footsteps faded before speaking. "You don't believe in ghosts?" "I believe in electrical shorts and crossed wires," he replied. But something nagged at him. The timing was too specific, the message too clear. This wasn't random failure, this was deliberate. An hour later, another visitor descended the stairs, this one moving with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to navigate the world quietly. Maria Torelli couldn't have looked less like her father. Where Vinny was broad and loud, she was slight and contained, her dark hair pinned back severely, her dress modest despite her family's money. "Miss Torelli," the craftsman said, surprised. "Your father was just—" "I know. I waited until he left." She glanced at Rosa, then back at him. "I need to ask you something, a favor, but Papa can't know." Rosa excused herself to the supply room, understanding the delicate nature of secrets in Italian families. Maria waited until the door closed before continuing. "I want to learn electrical work. Real electrical work, not just typing and filing." The craftsman studied her face, seeing determination beneath the careful composure. "Your father would—" "Kill you, yes, or at least ruin your business." She pulled out an envelope, thick with bills. "I can pay. Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Papa thinks I'm at secretarial school until 8. He thought of his own dreams at 19, of Herman taking a chance on a young man who showed up every day asking to learn. But Herman hadn't risked the wrath of Vincent Torelli. Why? Because I'm good at it. I've been reading every book in the library on electrical systems. I fixed our radio when the repair shop said it was hopeless. I understand how things work. Her composure cracked slightly. And because I don't want to end up married to one of Papa's business associates, running their house and pretending I never had a thought more complex than menu planning. Before he could respond, she added, I know about the sign, the message. I was there when it happened. And it's not supernatural. The tubes that stayed dark, they spell the blue Dahlia normally. The ones that lit up to say Lila is dead, those are different tubes. Someone's adding power to inactive portions of the display. The craftsman reassessed the young woman before him. She'd observed what dozens of panicked witnesses had missed. Tuesday evening, he heard himself say, bring rubber gloves and wear something you don't mind ruining. Maria's smile transformed her face, revealing the joy she kept hidden beneath dutiful daughter masks. She left the envelope on the workbench despite his protests, climbing the stairs with a lighter step than she'd descended. Rosa emerged from the supply room. You're going to regret that. Probably. He locked the money in the safe he'd installed behind a false panel. But Herman took a chance on me when everyone said Germans shouldn't be teaching Americans. Sometimes the craft chooses its students. That evening, he prepared for his inspection with the methodical care of a surgeon. Multimeter, checked and rechecked. Frequency detector he'd built from radio parts during the war when commercial equipment was impossible to find. A set of mirrors to check connections without climbing. And in his jacket pocket, a small camera Sam had procured, the kind that worked in low light. The Blue Dahlias sat on the corner of 31st and State, a two-story brick building that had been everything from a pharmacy to a funeral parlor, before Vinny transformed it into one of the South Loop's premier jazz venues. The sign stretched across the entire facade, normally a symphony of blue and white light that could be seen from 3 blocks away. He stood across the street, watching the evening crowd filter in. The sign blazed normally, each letter perfect. The dahlia blooming and receding in its programmed sequence. But he noticed something else. People looking up nervously. Some crossing themselves, others hurrying past. The sign had become an object of fear rather than attraction. Checking your handiwork? He turned to find Detective Patrick O'Malley beside him, the cop's bulk somehow compressed into a gray suit that had seen better decades. O'Malley had the face of a boxer who'd lost more than he'd won, but kept climbing into the ring anyway. Just routine inspection, the craftsman replied carefully. Routine. O'Malley lit his pipe, the tobacco sweet and foreign in the Chicago evening. Like that girl disappearing was routine. Like messages from the dead are routine. He puffed thoughtfully. You know what I think? I think this city's got too many secrets, too many people who know things they're not saying. The craftsman said nothing, having learned long ago that silence was safer than speculation when it came to Chicago cops. You knew her, didn't you? Lila Morgenstern. Installed a small sign in her dressing room a few weeks before she disappeared. Lila, in script, purple neon. She paid cash. O'Malley's eyebrows rose. Purple? Expensive. She said she was starting a tour soon. Wanted something portable for her new venues. The craftsman remembered her clearly. nervous energy, constantly checking the door, counting bills twice before handing them over. "Tour!" O'Malley knocked his pipe against a lamppost.
Funny thing about tours, they usually involve telling people where you're going. The craftsman positioned himself in the alley beside the Blue Dahlia at 1:45 in the morning, his equipment case at his feet, his eyes fixed on the sign's reflected glow against the opposite building's windows. The club had closed at 1, the last patrons stumbling out into the October night, leaving only the cleaning crew inside. He'd told Vinny he needed complete darkness around the sign to properly test it, a half-truth that got him solitary access. Chicago at this hour belonged to a different species of citizen. The night workers heading to early shifts, the drunks who'd lost track of time, the people whose business thrived in shadows. He pulled his coat tighter, noting how the temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset, typical of autumn in the city where lake winds could change everything in an hour. His frequency detector, a modified radio receiver with a meter he'd attached himself, sat on a wooden crate he'd dragged from behind the club's garbage bins. The needle remained steady, picking up only the standard 60-cycle hum of the city's electrical grid. He checked his watch, 2:10. If the phenomenon followed last night's pattern, he had 20 minutes to wait. A cat emerged from deeper in the alley, yellow eyes catching the neon's blue glow. It studied him with the casual disdain cats reserved for humans who invaded their territory, then settled beside a warm exhaust vent to watch. The craftsman found himself grateful for the company, even if it was just a tabby with matted fur and a notched ear from old fights. At 2:23, the detector's needle twitched. He leaned forward, adjusting the sensitivity dial. The needle swung harder, then began a rhythmic dance, not random interference, but a pattern. He grabbed his notepad, trying to transcribe the peaks and valleys into something that might make sense later. The air itself felt different, charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm, though the sky remained clear. At exactly 2:30 it happened. The Blue Dahlia sign flickered, not a power failure, but something more deliberate. Certain tubes dimmed, while others, tubes that shouldn't have been connected to active circuits at all, blazed to life. The familiar script twisted, letters going dark in some places, burning bright in others, until for 12 seconds, he counted them precisely, the sign read, "Lila is dead," in letters that seemed to pulse with their own urgency. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sign returned to normal. The craftsman's hands shook slightly as he photographed the frequency meter's readings. The needle had peaked at levels that shouldn't have been possible from standard electrical interference. This wasn't a short circuit or crossed wires. This was an induced electromagnetic field, strong enough to ionize gas in tubes that weren't even connected to power sources. The cat hissed, its fur standing on end, and fled deeper into the alley. The craftsman understood its discomfort. His own skin prickled with static, and when he touched the metal case of his equipment, a spark jumped between them. He made another note. Residual charge in conductive materials. Whatever was causing this had serious power behind it. Back in his workshop an hour later, unable to sleep despite the late hour, he spread his notes across the workbench. Rosa had left him a thermos of coffee, somehow knowing he'd need it. The liquid was bitter and strong, exactly what his tired mind required as he worked through the implications of what he'd witnessed. An electromagnetic pulse could theoretically cause the effect he'd seen. During the war, he'd heard stories from Navy electricians about radar interference causing strange glows in fluorescent fixtures on ships. But to create such a specific message,
to activate only the tubes that would spell those particular words. That required precise knowledge of the sign's construction and careful calculation of field strength and direction. He sketched a rough map of the surrounding buildings, trying to identify potential sources. The pulse had to originate from somewhere with a clear line of sight to the sign, somewhere with access to significant electrical power. His pencil circled 3 possibilities, but one stood out. The Edison building across the alley, 5 stories of offices and workshops, including, on the 3rd floor, Westbrook Electric Signs. Harold Westbrook. The craftsman knew him by reputation. Decent work, but cutting corners where he could, always underbidding on contracts, bitter when he lost them. They'd crossed paths at suppliers, exchanged professional nods, nothing more. But Westbrook had bid on the Blue Dahlia sign and lost. Vinny had mentioned it during their first meeting, laughing about Westbrook's face when told his design was too ordinary. The workshop door opened. He'd forgotten to lock it in his hurry to analyze the data. But instead of a customer, Rosa entered, shaking rain from her coat. "Couldn't sleep," she said simply. "My brother managed to send a letter. Through Switzerland, then Canada. Took 2 months." She sat heavily in the customer chair, the letter clutched in her hands. The craftsman recognized the thin paper, the careful script of someone writing in dangerous circumstances. Is he safe? For now. The Soviets are consolidating control. He's in Krakow, working in a factory. He says... She paused, struggling with emotion. He says if he could get to the western zones in Germany, he might have a chance, but it requires money. Bribes for guards, forged papers, transportation. The craftsman thought of Maria Torelli's envelope in his safe. Strange how money flowed in this city. Too much in some hands, never enough in others. How much? More than I have. More than I can save, even working extra hours. She folded the letter carefully as if it might disintegrate from too much handling. In Poland during the war, we used to see lights in the sky sometimes. The Germans testing weapons, we thought, or the Russians. Strange glows that shouldn't exist. My brother, he studied physics before everything fell apart. He said it was electromagnetic phenomena, that strong enough fields could make the air itself glow. The craftsman's attention sharpened. Your brother understands electromagnetic fields? Before the war, he was going to be a professor. Now he makes sheet metal. The bitterness in her voice could have etched glass. But yes, he understands. Why? He showed her his notes from the night's observation. Rosa studied them with surprising comprehension, asking questions that revealed her brother had shared his knowledge during their years together. This frequency pattern, she said, pointing to one of his transcriptions. It's not random. It's modulated, like a radio transmission, but much more powerful. Powerful enough to light up disconnected neon tubes? If focused correctly, yes. My brother explained once how Tesla could light bulbs without wires, just using electromagnetic fields. But to create words, specific words, she shook her head. That would take precise planning. They sat in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The craftsman found himself thinking about patterns, the missing singer, the ghostly message, the electromagnetic pulse, Westbrook's lost contract. Pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together yet. In his experience, when things didn't fit, it usually meant you were trying to force the wrong pieces together. I should go, Rosa said finally. Mrs. Patterson wants her beauty shop sign ready by Friday. Rosa, he called as she reached the door. Your brother. We'll figure something out.
She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and climbed the stairs into the pre-dawn darkness. The craftsman returned to his notes, adding Rosa's observations about the modulated pattern. If someone was deliberately creating this effect, they weren't just trying to damage the sign or create random interference. They were sending a message. But was it a warning, a confession, or something else entirely? He thought about Lila Morgenstern, her nervous energy when she'd commissioned that small purple sign. "For my tour," she'd said, but her eyes had been checking exits, not dreaming of future venues. Everyone in this story was running from something. Rosa's brother from the Soviets, Maria from her father's expectations, possibly Lila from debts or dangers unknown.
And now, someone was using his sign, his carefully crafted tubes and gases, to broadcast a message about death into the Chicago night. Detective O'Malley appeared in the workshop 3 days after the night observation, his bulk filling the doorway like a gray cloud threatening rain. The craftsman had been expecting him. In Chicago, strange phenomena involving missing persons never stayed uninvestigated for long, even by cops who'd rather be anywhere else. "Mind if I ask you some questions about Lila Morgenstern?" O'Malley didn't wait for permission, settling into the customer chair with a sigh that suggested his feet hurt more than his pride would admit. The craftsman continued working on a pharmacy sign, bending green glass into perfect curves. "I told you before, I only met her once. The dressing room sign." "Funny thing about that sign." O'Malley pulled out a notebook, pages yellowed and curled from years of pocket storage. "A roommate says Lila paid for it the day before she disappeared. Cash, like you said. But here's the interesting part. She told the roommate it was for protection." "Protection?" The craftsman's torch hand remained steady, but his mind raced. "Neon signs don't protect anything except maybe from darkness." "That's what I thought. But the roommate, Betty something or other, she says Lila was specific, said the purple light would keep them away." O'Malley's eyes, small and sharp in his broad face, watched for reaction. "Them. Not him or her. Them." Rosa chose that moment to emerge from the supply room, carrying boxes of electrodes. She froze, seeing O'Malley, the fear of authority that never quite left those who'd lived under occupation flickering across her face. The detective noted it, filed it away. He had that kind of mind, the craftsman realized, that cataloged fear like others collected stamps. "Miss, Rosa works here," the craftsman said firmly. "She wasn't employed when Lila came by." O'Malley nodded, but kept watching Rosa as she carefully placed the boxes on shelving. "Betty also mentioned Lila owed money. Not just a little. We're talking serious debt to serious people. The kind who don't accept payment plans. Gambling? Her brother came back from the war with what the doctors call combat fatigue, and what everyone else calls a death wish. Played cards with the wrong people, borrowed from worse people to cover his losses. Lila was trying to clear his debts with her singing money." The craftsman thought about the envelope of bills Maria had left. How quickly fortunes changed in this city. One person's pocket money was another's impossible mountain. How much did she owe? 5,000. Might as well be 5 million for a jazz singer playing clubs. O'Malley shifted his weight, the chair creaking. But here's where it gets interesting. 2 days before she disappeared, she told Betty she'd found a way out. Someone was going to help her disappear, start fresh. Who? That's the $5,000 question. O'Malley stood with effort. But whoever's making your sign spell out death notices might know. You see anything else unusual, you call me. And I mean anything. This case has more angles than a geometry textbook.
After O'Malley left, trailing pipe tobacco and unspoken suspicions, Rosa finally spoke. In Warsaw, the underground used lights for signals. Different colors meant different things. Purple meant safe house. The craftsman considered this. Lila wasn't Polish. No, but fear is universal. When you're running, you look for any sign that says safety. She returned to her work, but added quietly, "That policeman knows more than he's saying." That evening, Maria arrived for her second lesson, wearing coveralls that looked newly purchased and carrying a notebook already filled with electrical diagrams she'd copied from library books.
Her enthusiasm was infectious, reminding him why he'd agreed to this dangerous arrangement. "I've been thinking about the sign phenomenon," she said, while practicing soldering connections. If someone wanted to create that specific message, they'd need to know exactly which tubes to activate. That means they've studied the sign's construction carefully. "Or they have the original blueprints," the craftsman said, then stopped. He'd filed his copy, but Vinny would have one, and the city permit office, and... "Who else bid on your father's sign?" "3 companies. Westbrook Electric, Deluxe Neon, and you." Maria's soldering iron paused. "Why?" He explained his electromagnetic field theory, watching her face transform from confusion to understanding to excitement. "So someone's using radio waves to light up specific tubes? That's brilliant. Horrible, but brilliant. Your father never mentioned any connection between the bidders and Lila." Maria shook her head, then stopped. "Wait. There was something. That numbers runner, Johnny McGrath, the one with the missing fingers. He was at the club one night when Papa was complaining about Westbrook's sour grapes over losing the contract. Johnny laughed, said Westbrook was betting heavy that Papa's club would fail within 6 months. The craftsman filed this information alongside everything else he'd learned. Patterns were emerging. But like looking at neon tubes before they were filled with gas, he could see the shape, but not the light that would reveal the full picture. After Maria left, proud of her successfully completed circuit board, he sat alone in the workshop, reviewing everything. Lila owed money to dangerous people. She sought protection through purple light. She claimed someone would help her disappear. Then she vanished, and now her name appeared in electromagnetic fire above the club where she'd once sung. He pulled out the photograph he'd taken of the frequency readings. Rosa was right. The pattern wasn't random. If you knew how to read it, it might tell a story. But he needed someone who understood both electromagnetic theory and had reason to create such an elaborate effect. The phone rang, startling him. Vinny's voice crackled through the receiver, panic barely contained. "It happened again, but different this time." "Different how?" "The message. It didn't say Lila is dead. It said Lila lives below. And there were witnesses, lots of them, including a reporter from the Tribune." The craftsman grabbed his coat and equipment case. As he climbed the stairs, he thought about those words, "lives below." In Chicago, below meant everything from basements to sewers to the tunnels that connected the old speakeasies. If Lila was alive and hiding, below would be exactly where she'd go. The city beneath the city had hidden more than bootleggers during Prohibition. These days, it hid anyone who needed to disappear but couldn't afford to leave. The question was, who knew she was down there, and why were they advertising it in letters of light? The public library on Michigan Avenue possessed the kind of silence that felt heavy, as if all the words in all the books were holding their breath. The craftsman sat at a corner table on the third floor, surrounded by electrical engineering texts and journals dating back to the 1920s. His fingers traced diagrams of wave propagation, gas ionization thresholds, the kind of technical minutia that would bore most people to tears, but which might explain how someone was turning his sign into a supernatural telegram. 3 days had passed since the "Lila Lives Below" message, and the Tribune's morning edition had run a front-page story about the ghost sign of South Loop. Vinny was beside himself. The publicity brought gawkers, but scared away regular customers. The craftsman had promised answers, and that promise had led him here, to dusty pages that smelled of knowledge and neglect. A journal from 1938 caught his attention, an article by a University of Chicago graduate student about directed electromagnetic fields and their effect on noble gases. The mathematics were complex, but the principle was simple. With the right frequency and power, you could make neon glow without any electrical connection at all. The student's name was H. Westbrook. Harold Westbrook had been an engineering student before becoming a sign maker. The craftsman felt pieces clicking together like tumblers in a lock, though the full picture remained frustratingly unclear. He made notes in his careful script, then noticed someone watching him from between the stacks. Sam Goldstein emerged, carrying an armload of books about European history. "Researching your ghost problem?" Sam asked, settling at the table with a soft grunt. "Something like that." "You?" "Trying to understand what's happening to Rosa's brother. The Soviets are rewriting borders like they're editing a rough draft." Sam adjusted his reading glasses. "You know, during the war I had a cousin in the Signal Corps. He told me stories about something called spoofing, sending false radio signals to confuse the enemy, make them think troops were somewhere they weren't." The craftsman looked up sharply. False signals. The interesting part was that sometimes atmospheric conditions would cause these signals to appear in unexpected places. Lights in the sky, voices from nowhere. The Germans called it Geistersignale, ghost signals. After Sam wandered back to his historical texts, the craftsman walked to the library's roof access, claiming he needed air. The October sky was steel gray, threatening rain that never quite came. From here, he could see the Edison building clearly, its facade of windows and fire escapes. On the roof, barely visible, was a new addition, what looked like an antenna array, but modified with copper coils that gleamed even in the dim light. He sketched what he saw, noting angles and distances. The array pointed directly at the blue Dahlia, positioned perfectly to broadcast electromagnetic energy at the sign. But proving it was Westbrook's doing would require more than sketches and suspicions. That evening, back in his workshop, Rosa was waiting with unexpected news. "Mrs. Kowalski from the bakery knows Lila's roommate, Betty. They go to the same church. Betty told her something she didn't tell the police. Lila had been taking electrical courses at the technical college, night classes, paying cash, using a false name." Electrical courses? The craftsman set down his tools. Why would a jazz singer study electrical work? Betty didn't know, but she said Lila was good at it, had notebooks full of circuit diagrams. The notebooks disappeared with her. Maria arrived for her lesson then, eager to show him a radio she'd repaired using techniques from their previous session. "Papa's been asking questions," she said while they worked, "about where I really go on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I told him I was studying with girlfriends, but he's suspicious." "Maybe you should stop coming," the craftsman suggested, though he'd grown to enjoy teaching someone so eager to learn. "No," her voice carried her father's stubbornness. "I'm learning too much. Besides, I've been watching that Westbrook character. He comes into Papa's club sometimes, sits in the back, never orders more than one drink, just watches." "Watching what?" "The sign, mostly. Times how long each sequence takes, makes notes. Papa thinks he's planning to steal the design, but I think he's studying it for another reason." The craftsman thought about the antenna array, the electromagnetic pulses, Westbrook's engineering background.
Has he ever mentioned Lila?
"Once. Said she got what girls like her deserve, playing with fire, running with dangerous men. But here's the strange part. He said it before she disappeared, not after." They worked in silence after that, Maria practicing connections while the craftsman mulled over this new information. If Westbrook knew something about Lila's fate before her disappearance, that suggested planning, conspiracy, something darker than just electromagnetic sabotage. Near midnight, after Maria had left and Rosa had gone home, the craftsman climbed to his own building's roof. The city stretched out below, a constellation of lights, street lamps, neon signs, apartment windows, all pushing back the darkness in their own small way. He set up his frequency detector, modified with a directional antenna Sam had helped him acquire from an army surplus store. Slowly, methodically, he swept the detector across the skyline. Most readings showed normal urban electromagnetic noise, radio stations, electrical lines, the constant hum of a modern city. But when he pointed it at the Edison building, the needle jumped and steadied at a specific frequency. Someone was broadcasting continuously, not in the radio spectrum, but in the range that would excite noble gases. He made detailed notes of the frequency, the modulation pattern, the signal strength. This was evidence, but not proof. For proof, he'd need to catch Westbrook in the act, trace the signal directly to its source, and that would mean getting inside the Edison building, past locked doors, and probably past Westbrook himself. As he packed up his equipment, a light rain began to fall, turning the city's lights into watercolor smears. He thought about Lila, possibly hiding in the tunnels beneath the city, about Rosa's brother trapped behind the Iron Curtain, about Maria fighting for a future her father couldn't imagine. Everyone was trying to escape something, to transform themselves like base gases into noble light. But someone was using that transformation for darker purposes, turning his craft into a weapon of fear and reputation destruction. The electromagnetic signals were just the mechanism. The real question was why? What did Westbrook, or whoever was behind this, gain from destroying Vinny's club and announcing Lila's fate to the world? The Edison building stood like a brick finger pointing at the gray October sky, its windows dark, except for a few offices where late-night accountants wrestled with numbers. The craftsman approached from the alley, carrying a toolbox that suggested legitimate business rather than investigation. He'd learned that confidence and appropriate props could open more doors than lockpicks. The night janitor, a Lithuanian named Petrus, whom Rosa had introduced him to at the Orthodox Church, nodded him through without question. "Third floor, like you asked," Petrus said in accented English. "Mr. Westbrook's workshop. He left an hour ago, won't be back until morning." The craftsman climbed the narrow stairs, each step echoing in the empty building. The third-floor hallway smelled of machine oil and hot metal, the signature scent of small manufacturing operations,
that filled buildings like this throughout the South Loop. Westbrook Electric signs occupied the corner suite, its frosted glass door adorned with samples of his work, competent but uninspired. The letters lacking the fluid grace that came from understanding glass as a living medium, rather than just tubing to be bent. The door was locked, but the transom window above it was cracked open for ventilation. The craftsman stood on his toolbox, pushing the transom wider, then pulled himself through with the kind of careful strength his work had given him. He lowered himself into Westbrook's workshop, his flashlight revealing a space that was both familiar and wrong. The same tools and materials as his own shop, but arranged with military precision, rather than the organic flow of actual work. The antenna array controls were in the back room, hidden behind a false panel that might have fooled a casual observer, but not someone who knew how much space electrical equipment actually required. The setup was more sophisticated than he'd expected. Not just a simple transmitter, but a complex system with vacuum tubes, frequency modulators, and a timing mechanism that would make a Swiss watchmaker envious. A notebook lay open on the workbench, filled with calculations in Westbrook's cramped handwriting. The craftsman photographed each page with Sam's camera, the flash briefly illuminating equations that calculated exactly how much power was needed to ionize specific noble gas mixtures at specific distances. The last entry was dated yesterday. Test successful. Tribune coverage exceeded expectations. VT considering closing. VT, Vincent Torelli. So Westbrook's goal was to destroy the club. But why? The craftsman searched further, finding invoices, correspondence, the mundane paper trail of a failing business. Then, in a locked drawer that yielded to patient manipulation, he found the answer. A contract dated 6 months ago, before the Blue Dahlia sign competition. Westbrook had purchased the building next to Vinny's club, planning to open his own establishment, the Neon Rose. But the purchase had drained his resources, and without the prestige of the Blue Dahlia Sign Commission, no investors would back him. If Vinny's club failed, the property value would drop, and Westbrook could expand cheaply. The craftsman was photographing the contract when he heard footsteps in the hallway. He killed the flashlight, moving silently behind a tall cabinet. The door opened, and Harold Westbrook entered, mumbling to himself about forgotten invoices. He moved directly to his desk, not noticing anything amiss until he saw the open drawer. "Who's there?" Westbrook's voice cracked with fear rather than anger. "I know someone's here." The craftsman stepped out, keeping his hands visible. "Hello, Harold." Westbrook's face cycled through surprise, anger, and finally a kind of resigned defeat. He was smaller than the craftsman remembered, his shoulders bent from years of leaning over workbenches, his hands stained with the same chemical marks they all carried. "Should have known you'd figure it out," Westbrook said, slumping into his desk chair. "You always were Herman's prize student. The electromagnetic pulse. Clever engineering. Thesis project from 38. Never finished the degree, ran out of money, had to go to work." Westbrook's laugh was bitter. "Spent 8 years perfecting something nobody wanted, until I realized I could use it for this. To destroy Vinny's business. To save mine." Westbrook pulled out a flask, took a long drink, didn't offer to share. "You don't understand what it's like, watching everything you built crumble. I'm 52 years old. Been making signs since I was 16, and what do I have? Debts, and a reputation for being second best." The craftsman thought about saying that he did understand, that they all struggled, but knew it would sound hollow. Instead, he asked, "What about Lila?" What about her? Westbrook's confusion seemed genuine. The messages. Lila is dead. Lila lives below. Westbrook stared at him, then laughed, a sharp, confused sound. Is that what people saw? I was just trying to disrupt the sign, make it flicker, fail. The electromagnetic pulse shouldn't create specific messages, just random activation. He pulled out his notebook, flipped through pages of calculations.
Unless, he trailed off, his engineer's mind working through possibilities. Unless someone else is transmitting too. Someone who knows she's alive, who wants to send a message, but needs cover. His face paled. Oh God, if they're using my transmission as camouflage, timing their signal to coincide with mine, who else knows about your equipment? Nobody. Well, Johnny McGrath saw it once when he came to collect on a bet, asked a lot of questions about range and frequency. I thought he was just making conversation. But if he told someone else... The craftsman remembered Maria mentioning Johnny's interest in Westbrook's bets against the club. Johnny Three Fingers McGrath, the numbers runner. He's more than that. Runs messages for the Torelli family's competitors. If Lila owed money to his bosses... Westbrook stood abruptly. We need to tell the police. Tell them what? That you've been sabotaging a competitor's sign with illegal electromagnetic transmissions? The craftsman shook his head. First, we need to find out who's sending the real messages. Westbrook looked at his equipment with new eyes, seeing it not as a tool of destruction, but as something that had been hijacked for another purpose. I can track the secondary signal. If someone's piggybacking on my transmission, there'll be harmonic frequencies. Give me an hour. They worked side by side, natural competitors united by a larger mystery. Westbrook's engineering knowledge complemented the craftsman's practical experience, and within 40 minutes they'd identified the secondary signal's origin, not from a building, but from below street level, somewhere in the underground tunnels that connected the old speakeasy network. The tunnels under 31st Street, Westbrook said, pointing to a maintenance map of the city's underground. They connect to the club's basement. If someone down there has a transmitter, the craftsman thought about the second message. Lila lives below. Not a claim, but a literal statement. Someone knew she was in the tunnels and was trying to communicate that fact. But to whom? And why use such an elaborate method? Harold, he said finally, shut down your equipment tonight. Whatever's really happening here, your part in it ends now. Westbrook nodded, defeated but also somehow relieved. What about my debts? The building? That's between you and your conscience. But the sabotage stops, or I go to O'Malley with everything. As the craftsman left through the front door this time, Petrus nowhere in sight, he wondered about the real message hidden in the electromagnetic noise. Someone wanted the world to know Lila was alive and below ground. That suggested either a rescue attempt or a threat. Given the players involved, gangsters, gamblers, and a missing singer with electrical knowledge, he suspected it was both. The workshop had transformed into something resembling a radio operator's station, crossed with a physicist's laboratory. The craftsman and Sam worked through the night, building detection equipment from parts scavenged from 3 different radio repair shops. Rosa had arrived at dawn with coffee and pastries, then stayed to help, her steady hands perfect for delicate wire work. If someone's broadcasting from the tunnels, Sam said, adjusting a vacuum tube in their improvised receiver, they need power. The old speakeasy lines were cut in 33.
Unless they spliced into newer lines, the craftsman suggested, consulting the city electrical maps Maria had mysteriously procured from her father's office. Look here. The club's basement connects to the tunnel system. Vinny had extra power lines installed for his refrigeration units last year. Rosa looked up from the coil she was winding. My brother wrote about partisan radios in Poland.
They used sewers and tunnels to hide transmitters. The underground passages acted like waveguides, carrying signals further than open-air transmission. The detection array took shape through the morning. A directional antenna mounted on a rotating platform, connected to their modified receiver, and an oscilloscope Sam had borrowed from a friend at the university. By noon, they were ready for field testing. We'll need to triangulate, the craftsman explained, marking positions on his hand-drawn map. 3 readings from different locations to pinpoint the source. They loaded equipment into the truck he rarely used, a '39 Ford that coughed like a tubercular patient, but still ran. The first position was easy, the alley beside the Blue Dahlia, where he'd first observed the phenomenon. The craftsman set up the equipment while Rosa kept watch, and Sam pretended to read a newspaper, actually observing windows in the surrounding buildings. At 2:30 precisely, their receiver crackled to life. The oscilloscope showed 2 distinct patterns, Westbrook's now familiar signal, weaker than before, and a second transmission, stronger, more focused. The craftsman noted the direction and signal strength, then they packed quickly and moved to the second position. The abandoned Schultz Brewery on 33rd Street provided roof access and a clear view of the area. The building had been empty since Prohibition ended, its copper kettles and pipes long since sold for scrap. But the structure remained sound. They climbed 5 flights of rusted stairs, equipment cases banging against the railings, emerging onto a tar roof that radiated October cold. There, Rosa pointed to a ventilation grate near the street that showed signs of recent disturbance. The dust pattern's been broken. Someone's been using that access. The second reading confirmed their suspicions. The signal originated from below, somewhere in the maze of tunnels that honeycombed this part of Chicago. The craftsman calculated angles and distances while Sam photographed everything with methodical precision. The third position required more creativity. They needed access to a building on the opposite side of the block, but everything was occupied. Finally, Maria appeared. She'd been monitoring their progress from her secretarial school, which conveniently overlooked their target area. Sister Catherine thinks I'm practicing typing, she said, leading them up a back staircase. The classroom's empty until 3. From the 4th floor window, they completed their triangulation. The signals converged on a specific point, directly beneath the intersection of 31st and Federal, where the old tunnel system had a major junction. According to the speakeasy maps, this was Crossroads Station, where bootleggers had sorted shipments for distribution throughout the South Loop. Now we know where, Sam said, but not who or why. The craftsman was studying the signal patterns on the oscilloscope when he noticed something odd. Look at this modulation. It's not random. It's Morse code, but modified. Extra long dashes, shortened spaces. Rosa leaned in, her experience with underground communications during the war proving invaluable. It's a Polish partisan cipher. Replace dots with short dashes, standard dashes with long ones. We used it because German equipment sometimes filtered out the higher frequencies of dots. They recorded several minutes of transmission, then Rosa set to work decoding.
Her pencil flew across paper, crossing out mistakes, starting over, gradually revealing the message. LM safe. Payment required for extraction. Respond Channel 7, midnight. LM. Lila Morgenstern. Someone was holding her for ransom, using the electromagnetic interference as cover for their ransom demands. But Channel 7 meant nothing in this context. It wasn't a radio frequency or a television channel. Not in 1946 Chicago. Channel 7, Maria said suddenly. Papa mentioned it once. It's what the old rum runners called Tunnel 7, the passage that leads to the dock district. If someone wanted to move a person secretly. Before she could finish, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Sister Catherine's voice carried through the door. Miss Torelli, are you practicing your shorthand? Maria gestured frantically for them to hide. The craftsman and Sam crouched behind desks, while Rosa stood naturally by the window as if admiring the view. Maria opened the door with practiced calm. Just finishing, sister. My friend Rosa stopped by to walk me home. Sister Catherine, a narrow woman who looked like she'd been pressed in a book, surveyed the room with suspicious eyes. But finding nothing obviously amiss, she nodded. 5 more minutes, then I need to lock the classroom. They waited until her footsteps faded, then quickly packed their equipment. As they prepared to leave, the receiver gave one final burst, not the coded message, but something else. A voice, barely audible through the static, singing a few bars of Blue Moon. Lila's signature song, the one she'd been performing the night she disappeared. She's trying to tell us she's alive, Rosa whispered. The craftsman thought about the elaborate setup required for these transmissions, the technical knowledge, the access to power, the understanding of both electromagnetic theory and underground Chicago geography. Whoever has her isn't just some street thug. This is sophisticated. Johnny McGrath, Sam said quietly. He's not just muscle. Word is he studied engineering before the war, got into numbers running when he couldn't find legitimate work with those missing fingers. The pieces were falling into place. Johnny had seen Westbrook's equipment, understood its potential. He knew about Lila's debts and her electrical knowledge. He could have offered to help her disappear, then turned it into a kidnapping when he realized her value. And he was using the ghost sign phenomenon to communicate with whoever would pay for her return. We need to get into those tunnels, the craftsman said. That's crazy, Maria protested. Those tunnels are dangerous. Half of them are flooded, the others might collapse. Then we need someone who knows them. The craftsman looked at Sam. Your nephew, the one who used to run liquor. Dead 2 years, Sam said. But his partner Tommy Kowalski is still around. Drives a cab now. Knows those tunnels like his own apartment. They agreed to meet that night, after the club closed. The craftsman would bring his detection equipment to pinpoint Lila's exact location. Rosa would prepare emergency supplies, blankets, food, first aid materials. Sam would find Tommy and convince him to guide them. Maria, despite her protests, would stay above ground to watch for trouble and alert them if necessary. Tommy Kowalski turned out to be a wire-thin man in his 60s who chain-smoked Lucky Strikes and walked with the careful steps of someone who'd learned that rushing led to federal prison. He met them at the workshop at 11 that night, carrying a canvas bag that clinked with what sounded like bottles. Lamp oil, he explained, pulling out several mason jars filled with clear liquid. Electric torches die in the tunnels. Too much moisture. But these, he produced cloth wicks, burn for hours and don't care about the damp. The entrance he chose was a maintenance hatch behind the abandoned brewery, hidden beneath years of accumulated trash and dead leaves. The metal covers squealed as they pried it open, revealing a ladder that descended into absolute darkness. The craftsman went first, his detection equipment strapped to his back, followed by Rosa with the supplies. Then Sam, moving carefully, and finally Tommy, who pulled the cover partially closed behind them. The tunnel was narrower than expected, lined with brick that wept moisture, and grew pale fungi in patterns that looked deliberate, but were simply nature reclaiming human ambition. Their oil lamps cast jumping shadows that made every surface seem to breathe. The air smelled of decades, mold, rust, and something sweet-sick that Tommy identified as good bourbon that never made it to market. "Stay close," Tommy whispered, though there was no obvious reason for quiet. Some of these passages collapsed in '38 when they were building the new sewer lines. "One wrong turn and we're either trapped or swimming." They moved through the underground maze, Tommy navigating by memory and instinct, occasionally consulting marks on the walls that looked like random scratches but were actually a bootlegger's map. The craftsman's detector picked up increasingly strong signals, the needle dancing with each pulse of electromagnetic energy. After 20 minutes of careful progress, they heard it, singing, faint but unmistakable. Blue Moon, in a voice trained for smoky clubs and heartbreak. Tommy held up his hand and they stopped, pressing against the wet walls. "That's the main junction ahead," he whispered. "Crossroads Station. If she's there, she's not alone. Nobody stays in the junction without protection. Too many ways in and out." The craftsman studied his detector readings. The signal was strongest dead ahead, maybe 50 feet. But there was something else, a regular clicking that wasn't part of the transmission. Telegraph key, he realized. Someone was sending messages the old-fashioned way, too. They crept forward until the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, lit by electric bulbs jerry-rigged to cables that snaked along the ceiling. The space had been a sorting room during Prohibition, and remnants remained. Broken crates, rusted bottle caps, a desk that had somehow survived 13 years of abandonment. At the desk sat Johnny McGrath, his three-fingered hand working a telegraph key while his good hand held a microphone connected to the electromagnetic transmitter. The equipment was sophisticated, clearly built by someone who understood both electrical engineering and radio theory. But it was the figure in the corner that drew their attention. Lila Morgenstern sat on a makeshift bed of army blankets, her platinum hair dull with grime, her famous green dress replaced by work clothes. She wasn't bound or gagged, but the resignation in her posture suggested captivity more clearly than any chains could have. The craftsman stepped into the light before anyone could stop him. "Hello, Johnny." McGrath spun around, his hand going to his pocket, but stopped when he saw they weren't police or rival gangsters. "The sign man. Should have known you'd be the one to figure it out." His voice carried more exhaustion than threat. "Let her go, Johnny." "Can't do that." McGrath stood slowly, favoring his left leg. "Not until I get word that her brother's debts are cleared. $5,000 or they kill him. Maybe her too, just for the principle of it." "My brother's debts aren't yours to negotiate," Lila said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was hoarse but still carried the strength that had filled nightclubs. "They are when I'm the only thing standing between you and the Torelli competition," Johnny replied. "You think Vinny's the only one who runs clubs in this town?" "The North Side boys want you dead as an example to anyone else who thinks they can welsh on debts." Rosa stepped forward, her lamp held high. "So you faked her death? I offered to help her disappear, Johnny admitted. She came to me because she knew I understood electronics, saw me fixing radios at the club. The plan was simple. She hides down here for a week. I spread word she'd been killed. Her brother uses the confusion to skip town. But then you saw Westbrook's equipment, the craftsman said, understanding flooding through him. Pure accident. I was collecting on a bet when I saw his transmitter. Realized I could use it as cover to send ransom demands. If the ghost sign was already acting up, nobody would notice a few extra signals. Johnny's laugh was bitter, except the messages got mixed up. Westbrook's interference pattern, combined with my transmissions, created those word messages.
Lila is dead was never intended, just random chance that scared everyone. Including the people who want their money, Sam observed. Now they think she's dead and the debt dies with her. Until Lila Lives Below appeared, Johnny said. Now they know she's alive and they're searching. I've been trying to negotiate, but they want proof of life. That's what the singing was, being recorded and transmitted to prove she's still breathing. The craftsman looked at the elaborate setup, the transmitter, the power cables spliced from above, the telegraph key for backup communication. All this intelligence and effort spent on a plan that had spiraled out of control. There's another way, he said finally. Westbrook owns the building next to Vinny's club. He's desperate for money. What if Vinny bought it, used the profits to clear the debts? Papa would never, Maria started to say, then appeared at the chamber entrance, having followed them despite orders to stay above.
Actually, he might. He's been wanting to expand.
You shouldn't be here, the craftsman said. But Maria was already moving toward Lila, pulling water and food from Rosa's supply bag. $5,000 for a building worth maybe $3,000, Johnny mused. Vinny's no fool. He is when it comes to his reputation, Maria said. Tell him buying the building will end the ghost sign problems and make him the hero who saved Lila. He'll pay double just for the story. They spent the next hour working out details. Johnny would send a final transmission announcing Lila had been found alive, victim of a kidnapping, rescued by concerned citizens. Westbrook would confess to the electromagnetic interference as a business rivalry gone wrong, paying a fine but avoiding prison. The building sale would happen quietly, the money flowing through Sam's pawn shop to maintain legitimacy. What about me? Lila asked. I can't go back to singing.
They'll always be watching.
Wisconsin, Rosa said unexpectedly. My cousin runs a music school in Madison, always needs teachers. Far enough from Chicago that nobody will look, close enough that your brother can visit once his debts are clear. As they prepared to leave, guiding Lila through the tunnels towards safety, the craftsman noticed Johnny packing his equipment with the same careful precision he'd seen in his own workshop. Despite everything, McGrath was a craftsman too, just one whose materials were deception and electricity rather than glass and gas. What will you do? He asked Johnny. California, maybe. Heard they're hiring electrical engineers for television work. These hands might be short a few fingers, but they still know their way around a circuit. The meeting took place in Sam's pawn shop at dawn, the windows still dark, the closed sign keeping the world at bay. Vincent Torelli sat behind Sam's counter like a king holding court in exile, his usual bombast deflated by the strange tale he'd just heard. Detective O'Malley leaned against a display case of watches, his expression suggesting he was deciding whether to arrest everyone or just pretend none of this had happened. So, you're telling me, Vinny said slowly, that Lila's been living in the tunnels under my club for 2 months. Johnny Three Fingers turned kidnapper to save her from worse, and my sign's been haunted by Harold Westbrook's jealousy and bad engineering? That's the short version, the craftsman confirmed, standing near the door in case quick exit became necessary. Lila sat in the shop's back room, visible through the open doorway, wrapped in a clean blanket Rosa had brought. She'd refused to hide any longer, insisting on facing whatever came next with her eyes open. Her brother sat beside her, his hands shaking from more than just withdrawal. The reality of how close they'd both come to death was settling in. The building, Vinny continued, focusing on the part that made sense to him. Westbrook wants $5,000 for a property worth $3,000. That's extortion. That's business, Sam interjected mildly. You need the building to expand. He needs the money to avoid bankruptcy. And coincidentally, that exact amount clears certain debts that certain people need cleared. O'Malley pulled out his pipe, thought better of it, put it away. Officially, I should arrest all of you. Kidnapping, extortion, tampering with electrical systems, probably 6 other crimes I haven't thought of yet. Unofficially, the craftsman asked. Unofficially, I'm tired, my feet hurt, and the paperwork would take until Christmas. O'Malley straightened his tie. Miss Morgenstern was recovering from exhaustion in a private sanitarium. Mr. McGrath's already on a train to California. Mr. Westbrook had technical difficulties with his completely legal electrical experiments. And you, sign man, were just doing your job. Maria emerged from the back room where she'd been talking quietly with Lila. Papa, she's willing to perform one last time at the club. A farewell concert. Think of the publicity, the singer who came back from the dead. Vinny's eyes lit up with the possibility of profit overcoming his anger. That would pack the house for weeks, maybe months. He stood. Decision made. Sam, draw up the papers for the building. Clean money, nothing traceable. Westbrook gets his $5,000, but he signs a non-competition agreement. No signs within 6 blocks of my properties. And Lila, the craftsman asked, takes her bow, collects her pay, and disappears for real this time. Wisconsin, California, wherever singers go when Chicago's done with them. Vinny's voice softened slightly. She's got talent. Shame it got tangled up in her brother's weakness. They dispersed as the city woke up, each returning to their respective corners of Chicago's complex ecosystem. The craftsman found himself walking with Rosa and Maria, an unlikely trio brought together by electromagnetic fields and human desperation. I've been thinking, Rosa said as they reached the workshop. My brother's papers finally came through. He'll be here by Christmas. He knows electronics, physics. Maybe you could use another assistant. Maybe I could, the craftsman agreed, thinking of all the signs waiting to be built, all the darkness waiting to be pushed back. Maria checked her watch. I need to get to school, but Tuesday you have a real lesson, the craftsman interrupted. Enough theory. Time you learned to bend glass. That evening, he stood across from the Blue Dahlia as Harold Westbrook's crew removed the electromagnetic equipment from the Edison building's roof. The sign blazed normally, its letters spelling nothing but what they were supposed to spell. The ghost messages had ceased, though rumors would persist for years, becoming part of Chicago legend. Westbrook appeared beside him, looking older, deflated. I wanted to apologize. Got so focused on survival, I forgot what we're supposed to be doing. What's that? Making light. Creating beauty. Giving people something to look at besides darkness.
Westbrook pulled out a flask, offered it. The craftsman accepted, tasting bourbon that burned like neon gas. "I'm keeping the shop open. Taking smaller jobs. Signs for bakeries, barber shops, nothing fancy." "Nothing wrong with that. City needs all kinds of light." They watched the crowd gathering outside the club. Word had spread about Lila's farewell performance tomorrow night. People wanted to see the singer who'd returned from death, even if death had only been a tunnel beneath their feet. "You know what the funny thing is?" Westbrook said. "My electromagnetic field experiment actually worked. Just not how I intended. Instead of destroying Vinny's business, I created the biggest advertisement he's ever had. That club will be famous forever as the place with the ghost sign." The craftsman thought about unintended consequences, about plans that twisted in ways their creators never imagined. Every sign he built was supposed to say one thing, but might end up meaning something entirely different to the people who saw it. "I should go," Westbrook said. "Got a bakery sign to finish. Simple job. No electromagnetic fields, no ghost messages, just fresh bread daily in warm white." After he left, the craftsman remained, watching the city's lights begin their nightly battle against darkness. Tomorrow Lila would sing one last time, her voice filling the club where her name had burned in supernatural fire. Then she'd board a train for Madison, where Rose's cousin would help her become someone new, a teacher, not a singer, trading spotlight for classroom. Johnny McGrath was already in California, his three-fingered hands learning the new language of television, translating electrical current into moving pictures instead of ghostly messages. The tunnels beneath Chicago would return to their silence, holding their secrets like the good bourbon that never made it to market. But tonight, the sign blazed true, each letter exactly where it should be, pushing back the darkness with honest light. The craftsman pulled out his notebook, sketching ideas for a new design, something with sequential circuits and flowing transitions, something that would make people stop and wonder not at supernatural intervention, but at the simple miracle of gas and glass and electricity combining to spell dreams against the night. Sam appeared beside him, chest set under his arm. "Game? Workshop's closed. Rosen's is open. Coffee's terrible, but the lights are good." They walked together through streets illuminated by 1,000 signs, some the craftsman's work, others Westbrook's, still others made by hands long stilled. Each one pushed back darkness in its own way, selling products or services, or simply declaring that here, in this spot, humans had decided to make light. December brought the kind of snow that transformed Chicago into a different city, one where sharp edges softened, and even the shabbiest buildings gained dignity under white blankets. The craftsman stood on the roof of the Marshall Fields building, securing the last connection on a massive Christmas display, angels in white neon ascending and descending in programmed sequence, their wings catching and reflecting the snow. 2 months had passed since the ghost sign mystery resolved itself in the tunnels beneath the city. The story had become legend, twisted with each telling, until some versions had Lila's actual ghost writing messages in fire. Others claimed it was a communist plot, and still others insisted the whole thing had been Vinny's publicity stunt. The craftsman knew the truth was both simpler and more complex. Just people trying to survive, using whatever tools they possessed. His workshop had changed. Rosa's brother Stefan had arrived 3 weeks ago, thin as paper but with eyes that still held intelligence despite what he'd seen in Poland. He'd taken to neon work like breathing, his theoretical knowledge complementing the practical skills Rosa had developed. They worked as a team now, handling the increased business that came from being the man who'd solved the ghost sign. Maria came by twice a week, officially for secretarial work, but actually to perfect her glass bending. She'd achieved something remarkable last Tuesday, a perfect spiral of green neon that would become part of a Christmas tree for a department store. Vinny still didn't know about her lessons, though the craftsman suspected the old Italian was less oblivious than he appeared. "Letter for you," Rosa said, climbing the ladder with an envelope. "Wisconsin postmark." He opened it carefully, his thick gloves making the task difficult. Lila's handwriting was as elegant as her singing had been. "Thank you for seeing the truth in all that light. Teaching music to farm children isn't the stage, but it has its own rewards. My brother's clean, working at a radio repair shop in Milwaukee. The debts are paid, the past is past. Sometimes I dream in neon colors. I suppose we all carry the light that saved us." No signature, but none was needed. The craftsman folded the letter, tucked it into his coat. Below them, Chicago spread out in its winter clothes, the snow making every light source seem stronger, every shadow deeper. The city had survived another year, added another layer to its complicated history. "The Torelli sign needs adjustment," Rosa said, pointing toward the South Loop. "The sequential circuit you installed for the Christmas season keeps freezing." Even from this distance, he could see the blue Dahlia sign, now famous throughout Chicago as the haunted sign that had revealed a kidnapping, saved a singer, and exposed a rivalry. Vinny had refused to change it, even added a plaque, site of the famous ghost sign incident, October 1946. The tourists loved it. They climbed down from the roof, navigating icy ladders with practiced care. In the van, he'd finally replaced the dying Ford, Stefan waited with the heater running, studying an electrical engineering textbook. "The Marshall Fields people want to discuss Easter displays," he said in his careful English. "Something with rabbits that appear to hop." "After we fix Vinny's sign," the craftsman said, but he was already thinking about the technical challenges of making neon rabbits seem to move. The Blue Dahlia was preparing for its evening crowd when they arrived. The club had been expanded into Westbrook's former building, doubling its capacity. Where there had been rivalry and sabotage, now there was Chicago's newest hotspot. Westbrook himself had moved to the suburbs, making signs for grocery stores and gas stations, finding peace in smaller ambitions. The problem with the sign was simple. Moisture had gotten into one of the timer mechanisms, forming ice that prevented proper connection. The craftsman fixed it in minutes, but Vinny insisted they stay for coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into watching the evening crowd arrive. "You know what I learned from all that craziness?" Vinny asked, his fifth espresso making him philosophical. "Everything's connected. Westbrook's jealousy, Johnny's desperation, Lila's fear, your skill, pull one thread and the whole fabric moves." Detective O'Malley was at the bar, off-duty but never really off-duty, nursing a beer and watching the crowd with cop's eyes. He raised his glass to the craftsman, a silent acknowledgement of mysteries solved and laws bent in the service of rough justice. "Papa," Maria said, appearing in a cocktail dress that made her look older than her 19 years, "the bandleader wants to know if we're doing the tribute tonight." Every Friday, the band played Blue Moon in memory of Lila's last performance. Some customers claimed they could still hear her voice in the music, though that was probably the gin talking. Vinny nodded, and soon the familiar melody filled the club. The craftsman stood to leave. He had an early morning installation at a new movie theater.
when Sam appeared at his elbow. "Chess tomorrow? If the snow permits." Snow never stopped chess. The Russians play in blizzards. The Russians are crazy. So are neon sign makers who crawl through tunnels to rescue singers. Outside, the snow continued falling, each flake catching the light from the signs that lined the street. The craftsman watched them swirl, thinking about the patterns they made, random but beautiful, temporary but memorable. Like the ghost messages that had appeared in fire above this very spot. They existed just long enough to matter. Stefan and Rosa were discussing something in Polish by the van, their breath making clouds that glowed in the neon light. Seeing him, they switched to English. "We were thinking," Rosa said, "about a new technique, using different gas mixtures to create color gradients." "Stefan has the mathematics worked out. Show me Monday," the craftsman said, but he was smiling. The craft would continue, evolve, find new ways to push back darkness. As they drove through the snowy streets, past windows glowing with Christmas lights and signs declaring sales and specials and services, the craftsman thought about Herman, his old mentor. "Every sign tells two stories," Herman had said. "The one it's supposed to tell, and the one it actually tells." The blue Dahlia sign had been supposed to advertise a jazz club. Instead, it had told a story of survival, desperation, and the lengths people would go to save themselves and others. The ghost messages, born from electromagnetic interference and human ingenuity, had revealed more truth than any normal advertisement ever could. Back at the workshop, after Stefan and Rosa had gone home to the apartment they shared, the craftsman sat at his bench, sketching designs for the Easter display. Rabbits that seemed to hop, eggs that appeared to roll, technical challenges that would require new solutions. But that was the nature of the craft, always pushing forward, always finding new ways to shape light. The newspaper on his desk carried a small item on page 6. Former Chicago singer opens music school in Madison. No names, but he knew. Lila had found her new life, teaching farm children to carry tunes instead of singing for crowds who might or might not remember her name. He turned off the workshop lights, but the samples in the window continued to glow. Red beer signs, blue service markers, white letters spelling common words. Each one represented hours of work, problems solved, glass bent to will and filled with noble gases that transformed electricity into light. Tomorrow, he'd build new signs, fix old ones, teach Maria something she shouldn't know, and Stefan something he needed to know. Sam would defeat him at chess while discussing Spinoza. Someone would need something spelled in light against the darkness, and he would make it happen. The snow continued to fall, covering Chicago's sins and secrets equally, making everything clean, if only temporarily. In the morning, the city would wake to a transformed world, one where every surface reflected light differently, where shadows fell in unexpected places. But tonight, walking home through streets where his signs and others pushed back the winter darkness, the craftsman thought about light itself, how it revealed and concealed, how it could lie while telling truth, how it gave humans the audacity to say, "Here I am," to the universe. The ghost sign had been silent for 2 months now, spelling only what it was meant to spell. But sometimes, when the snow fell just right and the light caught the flakes at the proper angle, observers swore they could still see words forming in the space between the tubes. Not "Lila is dead," but other messages. Hope lives, truth glows, light persists. The craftsman knew better. Those were just patterns people wanted to see, like faces in clouds or futures in tea leaves. The real message was simpler. In a city full of darkness, someone had bent glass, filled it with gas, and made it glow. Everything else was just the story people told themselves about the light.